Hi there. I'm back. It's been a minute. I was a little late to posting this, but let's get into my February wrap up and March TBR. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Emily, and even though it's been a minute, I'm excited to get into these books that I read in February and to be back to filming a little bit. I was gonna post a video in between this and the gothic recommendations video, but the video that I was planning to do was my 2025 goals, and I was like, it's pretty late in the year to post this, and also I don't really ever have super concrete goals, so I was like, I don't really care about posting this. My goals kind of are always in flux anyway, so I didn't post that. And then I was going to try and post this right on the last day of February, since Friday is my normal posting time, but I was really trying to finish Kindred by Octavia Butler on Friday, and so I was like, okay, if I really want to finish this before the end of the month, I'm gonna postpone this recording it until Saturday, and then I was gonna post it on Sunday, but then I just didn't feel like filming over the weekend, and I honestly didn't need to postpone in the first place because I didn't end up finishing Kindred by Octavia Butler because I started working on a sewing project on Friday, and I forgot how much brain power it takes up for me personally when I'm cutting out pattern pieces, and so I cannot listen to an audiobook while I'm doing that, and so I couldn't listen to the audiobook for that while I was doing that, and so I didn't end up finishing it, so I could have just filmed Thursday, posted Friday as I was originally planning, but here we are. Anyways, getting right into my February wrap up, I ended up reading 7 books in February, which was one less than in January, but still above my average reading speed, which is exciting, and I'm still doing really good in the physical books realm, which is making me really happy. Physical is typically my least read format, but both of the past 2 months, it's been tied with audiobooks, and so that's making me really happy. But for February specifically, I read 3 hardbacks, 3 audiobooks, and 1 digital book. I did end up switching from reading Kindred in digital to audio. I'm liking the experience of listening to it a lot better. Since it was written a while ago, the writing style isn't 100% my favorite, even though I am really enjoying the plot and the pacing and everything. So listening to it feels a lot more enjoyable to me, but I haven't 100% finished that one out yet. So that full review will go in my March wrap up. As far as the time it took me to read books this month, my average reading speed was, or I finished a book on average every 12 days, and my average star rating was 4.07, which is higher than January, so that's super cool. And that's all my general overview stats. As usual, much more in-depth stats will be coming in my next video when I post my February journaling stuff and my March intro page for that. But getting into the books. The very first book that I finished in February was A Love Song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. I actually finished this book before I posted my February TBR, I think. Either that or I had started it before then. But I really absolutely loved this book. I will say I hate the way that people talk about this book online, because whenever I've ever seen anyone give a synopsis for this book, they're low-key spoiling it, because the plot summary that everyone uses to describe this book is of events that you don't for sure 100% learn about until 50% into the book. So I don't love that, and I was spoiled about how that thing happens as well, which you don't learn until quite a lot later in the book, past the 50% mark. That's not even a hint or a guess of what's happening. That's very much solidly something that you don't learn until 50-60% into the book. So that was a little frustrating just on a personal reading experience level. But for an actual general idea of what this book is, this book follows Ricki Wilde, our main FMC, and she is the youngest daughter of this Black empire. They own a bunch of funeral homes, and the dad founded this, and kind of everyone in the family. She has 3 older sisters, and all three of her older sisters are like really ambitious and embedded in this funeral home empire that her father started, and she really does not want to be a part of this. She hates working in the funeral homes. She is like a secretary assistant kind of person at one of the funeral homes, and she really hates it. And so she shows up to her family dinner that they have every week, and she's like, "Hey guys, I'm quitting and I'm going to start a flower shop, which has always been my dream in New York." And she just happens to meet a recently widowed woman, and she says, "Hey, I have this empty space that would be great for your shop in the bottom floor of my home. Please come live with me in Harlem. I will have someone around since I am very lonely now that my husband has just died, and you will have a place where you can start your flower shop." So she moves out to Harlem and starts her flower shop, and it kind of just follows her journey of trying to start this flower shop when she suddenly and seriously stumbles across this community garden. She's kind of just wandering around her space, and trying to feel more comfortable in her neighborhood where she's living. And in this community garden, she stumbles upon this mysterious man, and it seems that they have a very instant connection, but he immediately, like, is very on guard and flees, and it follows her trying to figure out more about him and why she keeps running into him all over New York, and the story just goes from there. I really, really loved it. I thought it was so super cute. It touches on some really heavy themes, so I take most of the content warnings pretty seriously, but I think it handles them in a really beautiful way. And I did just finish 7 Days in June, which is another Tia Williams book, and I think that she's just really great at handling heavy subject matter in romance books in general. And I think this just explores a lot of really interesting topics. I ended up giving this a 4.5 instead of a 5, just because it has one trope in this book that I am really tired of seeing in romance books, and I really thought that this was gonna get around that. I had a theory of how this was gonna not fall into being that trope, even though it was kind of like setting it up to be that trope. And then it didn't do that, which I was a little bit upset about, but that's mainly the reason I got 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's a very particular thing for me. I'll put up a spoiler banner real quick in case you've read this book or you don't care about having spoilers for this book. But the trope that I don't love in romance books is like the 100-year age gap kind of thing. And I thought that we were going to get around that by having it be like that he only came into existence every leap year, and that was his curse. But then it was revealed that he's been alive for all of the years since the curse was put on him, and I didn't love that. So that was my only like minor gripe about this book. And then I think that the ending was a little like, I don't know how you would have ended this book differently, but I didn't love the way that it ended, if that makes sense, where the I don't remember her name anymore because I read this literally like at the very, very beginning of February, but the like grandma figure, I didn't love that she like had to die in order for Ricki to live, but that was also just like a minor me thing because I don't know how else you would have solved this book with the way that it was set up. And I don't hate the fact that she died, I just hate that she had to die for Ricki to live, I guess. So that was my only other minor problem, and that was why I got 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Maid and the Crocodile by Jordan Ifueko, and I adored this book. I love Jordan Ifueko. I read The Ray Bear when it like almost right when it first came out. I read it, I think, at the beginning of 2021, and it came out in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. So I listened to it in audiobook pretty quickly after it came out, and I immediately loved it and was super excited for the second one. But then I didn't get around to reading the second one until I did my reread of Ray Bear last year and then read Redemptor as well. I did think that Redemptor didn't have like as tight of a plot and the same kind of feeling that Ray Bear did. Ray Bear was like such an expansive world, and all of the characters were so unique and interesting, and I thought Redemptor fell a little bit flatter than that. but I also fully don't blame that on Jordan ifueko. She talks about in her author's note that she asked for an extension for Redemptor and her publisher refused to give it to her, so I fully blame the fact that I didn't like Redemptor as much as Raybear on the publisher and not on Jordan ifueko, because I can see all of the like building blocks of what she was doing and how she would have expanded the world and made it feel more like Raybear did if she'd been given the time to do that. So with that being said, I was really, really hopeful for The Maid and the Crocodile because I loved Raybear so much, and I knew that this was set in the same world, and I knew that she had a little bit more time to work on this, and this was perhaps since Raybear and Redemptor were, I don't know how successful they were, but I feel like in my corners of the book internet and book community, people talk about them a lot. So at least in my circles, I feel like they're pretty successful and pretty beloved. So I think she would have been given more time for The Maid and the Crocodile. And so I was really excited to get into it, and I absolutely just loved it. It feels like so written for me because it has so many nods to and the atmosphere of so many different things that I love. It has some magic systems that are inspired by Howl's Moving Castle. It has a very like Beauty and the Beast inspired plot and romance for parts of it. It borrows from a lot of like really whimsical, beautiful things like that. And I just really, really loved it. I love living in this world that Jordan ifueko has created every moment that I'm reading her books. And I just think the world is so beautiful, and the way that the magic system is done is so beautiful, and all of the characters are so incredible in all of the books, and they're so unique, and they have so many different kinds of struggles, and I really loved our main characters, and this as well. I will say, if you are planning to read this, I very, very highly recommend reading Raybear and Redemptor first, even though this is technically a standalone set in the same world. One of our main characters is in Redemptor, and also our main character is like a cameo character from one of the other books, and I just feel like it's more impactful if you've already read the events that they're talking about in this book in Raybear and Redemptor. So that is my recommendation. I will say, I very much think that you should read those before you go into this, but this still could be read as a standalone if you absolutely wanted to check this one out first. Again, this is my recommendation. All right, the next book I read was not on my TBR originally, but I've had this book on my shelves for almost a year. I think it came in the July Satisfaction box, so maybe like 8 months. Yeah. And it's just like been calling to me ever since I got it, and I felt like it was my Valentine's Day read also. My husband and I took a trip to a different city in our state, Washington. We like took a train down, and so this was my train book that I was reading while we were on the train, and I thought it fit for Valentine's Day. It is a sweet little sapphic romance. I don't know why I said sweet. It's kind of like, and deals with a lot of heavy topics, but that is The Fall That Saved Us by Tamara Jeree. And this, yeah, I don't know why I said this is a sweet little romance book. It's, the main couple is very like sweet and romantic, and I love them a lot, but the surroundings of the book is not super sweet. So this follows our main character. She has like excommunicated her family. She has left home, and we learn pretty immediately she is a Nephilim, and she is descended from angels, and like her whole family's goal is to kill demons as they come onto the earth. And she very quickly runs into a succubus woman who is not trying to kill her and is just trying to like get to know her better. They instantly have like a connection and a spark, but our main character is kind of trying to fight it at the beginning of like, I shouldn't be interested in this woman because she is everything I've been taught to hate my entire life. But they very quickly fall in love and explore romantic relationships together. I really enjoyed this. I think that the themes discussed in this are very, very important. This touches a lot on a lot of like religious constriction, and using religion to control people. That's like her mother's entire thing, is she is very controlling and pretty abusive to all of her kids, and our main character is just the youngest of them, and she had left, and so it deals a lot with like her kind of like deconstructing all of the religion and stuff that her mom taught her, and kind of coming to terms with the fact that her mom wasn't a super great person and was actually like a lot worse than she had initially thought, and was doing a lot more programming than she thought she was doing out of her own trauma and her own pain, to all of her kids. So there's a lot of that going on, and I think all of those themes are really, really well discussed, and I really also enjoyed our main relationship between the main two characters. They are really sweet together, and they help each other overcome a lot of trauma and pain from their past, and like help each other see the worth in themselves that they didn't really know that they had. So I really liked that as well. My only thing that needed a bit of work, in my opinion, for this book was the writing. Sometimes we would like drift from one thought to another, and there was no connection or correlation between the two thoughts, and I wouldn't know how we got from point A to point B. And there was at times when the writing was just like very jumpy, but that didn't happen super often. It was just a few times that I noticed, but when it did happen, I was really confused. I was like, how did no one pick up on this? But I think that was also probably just like an indie debut author kind of thing. So I didn't put too much weight on it, but it did take me out of the story sometimes. So that was mostly the reason that this got 4 out of 5 stars. But yeah, really enjoyed it. If you're looking for something kind of short and dealing in those kind of themes, I would recommend this one. The next book I read was The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and this was, I'm part of a nonfiction book club. I sometimes don't read the books though. The past like 2 books that they've picked, one of them, they were like halfway through when I joined the book club, so I wasn't going to read that one, and then the other one I'd already read. So this was my first book that I actually read with this book club that I've joined that's nonfiction, and I really, really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think all of the essays were very, very interesting, and I especially really loved the first one and the last one. I think they were very good, like, end caps to this book. And then I also felt especially like heartwarmed by the third one. The third one is about book banning and such, and I just thought that the way that progressed and kind of the ending of it was very like heartwarming and hopeful, which I really enjoyed. And even though the second one was probably technically my least favorite, it was still very good and wasn't in any way a bad essay. But yeah, I think this whole essay collection is really interesting and important. And I think that the way that it is written, especially, is really, really unique. The author doesn't really tell you what the end point of the essay is going to be. He kind of just like tells you the topic of the essay and then expects you to trust him to take you to the end point, and kind of just shares the story with you as he's going along, which I really, really personally enjoyed. I think I've seen some reviews of people that like didn't enjoy that writing style or like craft decision as much, but I personally really, really loved it. I loved trusting the author to take me where he wanted me to go and really hammer home the point after going on this kind of like rambling journey with him. I would definitely recommend. It was a pretty short audiobook listen. I listened to it mostly all in one sitting, and it is read by the author, so that was cool as well. So yeah, just a pretty short audiobook, but touching on some very important topics. The first topic is about journalism. The second topic is him returning to Africa and kind of exploring the differences between Africa and Black African Americans, and kind of the like gap, but then also the homecoming that it feels like. So I thought that was interesting. The third one, like I said, is about book banning, and then the fourth essay is about Palestine. So I thought they were all really interesting, and I, again, just really loved the way that it was written, so highly recommend. Then I finished Natural Beauty by Ling Huang, and I'm really disappointed that I didn't love this one as much as I thought I was going to. This has a somewhat similar topic to Rouge. I would say they're both in the category of like, if you want more of the substance, you should read them, because they both focus on like the beauty industry and body horror out of the beauty industry kind of thing. But this one focuses a lot more on capitalism and such than Rouge does. And this one also doesn't have like as much of the gothic feeling that Rouge has. Rouge has like a very fairy tale gothic feeling to it, and this one doesn't have that as much. This one is much more like literary horror-esque than like weird gothic horror-esque, if that makes sense at all. But for the first like 50 to 60% of the book, I really, really was enjoying this. I was like, oh, this is for sure definitely going to be at least a 4-star. And depending on the end, it might like bump it up depending on how the ending goes. And the ending went exactly like the wrong way for me. I thought that the way that the story was being told was pretty interesting for, again, the first like 50 to 60% of the book. But the ending just got like really strange to me. I don't even know how to describe like what I didn't love about the ending. It was just, it felt like I was kind of expecting our protagonist. She doesn't really have a lot of agency ever throughout this book, but then things start happening around that 60% mark that you're kind of like, oh, this is gonna really like make her kind of like take her power back and start doing things on the offensive instead of just like existing in anything, or at least doing something on the defensive, because for the majority of this book she's kind of just like existing and letting the wind blow her whatever way it's gonna blow her, and it didn't do that. It didn't really give her a ton of agency. She doesn't ever really fight back against the villainous people. The one action that she takes as like a fighting back against them is very like conveniently, she just has to like press a button kind of thing. It's not her really like, she doesn't really do anything to make it happen. She kind of just is like there and does the final action to beat the villains, I guess. So I just like really didn't love that she never had any agency even at the climax of the book. She does gain a bit of agency like in the resolution of the book after the climax has already happened, as like kind of in the epilogue kind of style thing, which I did enjoy, like that piece of how it ended. I think everything after the climax of the book I was okay with, but everything from like the start of the climax to the end of the climax, I was like, this is all not great to me. And I also think that a lot of the like villain stuff was kind of excused-ish away, and I didn't love that. A lot of it was like, oh, this is actually just capitalism's fault, and we can't really blame the villains. And I was like, no, we can blame the villains. They're still pretty awful people. So I didn't really love that, like, hand wavy away kind of thing. I don't think our protagonist ever believes that, but a lot of the people, like, surrounding this, because it comes a very public, very prominent event. There's, like, a true crime documentary made about it, and I think that the protagonist doesn't disagree with it strongly enough for it to feel like the author is disagreeing with it, which I felt a little bit weird about. I don't think the protagonist ever fully buys into that narrative, but I didn't love that it was presented without any stronger opposition, if that makes sense. And also just a lot of the events in that last part of the book are not explained at all, because a lot of the time our protagonist is unconscious and she's just like appearing different places, and there's no real explanation to a lot of what is going on in the climax. And I unfortunately think that's because the author didn't know how to get from point A to point B, and so the protagonist just is unconscious so that we can get from point A to point B without having to explain it. So Yeah, I think the themes are really interesting. I think a lot of the beginning of the book is really, really compelling, but the ending of the book just did not land it for me and actually it took it in the opposite direction. So I end up giving this one 3 stars. Then we have A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. This was my book that I pulled from my TBR jar, and this was unfortunately my first Ava Reid book. I know a lot of people don't love this one, and it's kind of outside Ava Reid's normal real wheelhouse. This is the only YA one, I think, even though if I recall correctly, most of them have kind of that new adult age range of characters where they're either older teenagers or younger 20s, if I'm remembering correctly. So they're all kind of that same age range, but a lot of people don't like this one as much, and I think I will like the other ones more just based on the description. I think based on everything that I've heard about this book, I wasn't really sure if I was going to like it or not. And this one kind of just ended up being fine. I think that the premise is fine. I don't know that I love the premise in the first place. I don't think that the premise sounds super interesting, unfortunately. So that's also probably part of why I didn't love it. I think it's a little bit of a done premise of, oh, the Fae are real and only select women can see them. I think that's kind of a trope and a plot line that's been done quite a few times before. So just right off the bat, the premise, I was like, I don't know that this is going to be the most original or interesting thing that I've ever read, but we'll give it a go. And I ended up enjoying some parts of it. I think the atmosphere in this book is really impeccable. I loved all of the descriptions in this book. And I think there were some lines that hit pretty well, but I think this is pretty surface level feminism, if that makes sense. It doesn't delve too deeply into deeper issues. It's pretty when someone says that they're a feminist, this is the minimum that you expect them to believe in, kind of a thing. So it wasn't doing a ton of new stuff, which I think was the main reason that I wasn't super enthralled by it. I did read it all in one day, but it was more just because I was I want to know what happens in this book, and I'm afraid that if I put it down and don't finish it today, I will not have the motivation to pick it back up, rather than me being enthralled and wanting to not put it down, if that makes sense. Yeah, some of the themes are really good. I also think this has a weird, this is premised as enemies or rivals to lovers, and this is not bad at all. I think it was a weird choice to make them have any kind of animosity towards each other, or really our main character to have any kind of animosity towards the guy. Was a weird choice because pretty much the only reason that she has any animosity towards him is because she's being xenophobic. I think that was a really bad choice, in my opinion. It makes the romance feel a lot weaker, and it makes our main character a lot more questionable. That's also why I felt it was very surface level feminism, because that's literally never addressed. She apologizes to him for being slightly mean to him, and I'm that's not what you were doing, though. You weren't just being mean to him, you were being bigoted. I don't understand how we're pretending that this isn't what you were doing. So I really hated that part of the book. But I think the plot was fine. The atmosphere was really, really good. The writing was fine. Pretty much everything was fine. I think the atmosphere and then the main character kind of balanced each other out, because I didn't love some of our main character's actions, but then I really loved the atmosphere, so they kind of canceled each other out to make this just a very middle of the road book to me. So also, there's a sequel coming out to this, and it absolutely does not need to be written. I'm so confused why Ava Reid is making a sequel to this. This world is so fully closed. I don't know what that's about. I think that's a bad choice, but I probably won't be reading this sequel. But yeah, that's that. Okay, the last book that I ended up reading in February was How to Read Now by Elaine Castillo. And this is a series of essays kind of about how we should be reading better and how kind of just saying very broadly, like, oh, reading builds your empathy is kind of a harmful thing to do if you're not really examining how you're reading things. And while I do agree with the overall thesis of this book, I didn't find all of the essays super interesting, unfortunately. Um, there was a couple of essays that I was like, I really just don't care about the topic at all, so it's like hard to engage with the critique that you're making, I guess. A lot of this is very like pop culture-y, which I did not know going into this book, but this is very much like examining different pop culture things and showing how you should be reading into these things. And like I agree with the thesis and the method that she is analyzing all of these things with, but I just didn't find all of the essays super compelling because some of the pop culture things I just was like, I don't care about this. Like, I have never watched this show, or I have never and will never read books by this author, so, like, I'm not super compelled by these essays. So, I think the first essay was, or the prologue was really, really good. And then I think maybe it was the last essay I really enjoyed that was about Odysseus. I thought that that was a really interesting, like, and very well showcased kind of the entire point and her entire thesis that she was making throughout the whole book. But yeah, just some essays were way more interesting than others. I didn't find the entire thing super compelling as a whole work. But I think I still would recommend it. I think it is very important to be aware of like the world that surrounds media that we're consuming. So again, very much agree with the thesis, just wasn't super engrossed in every single essay, but there were certainly a lot of good essays in this, which is why it's still about 4 stars. And that is all of my books I ended up reading in February. Like I said, I am pretty close to the end of Kindred. I'm like 86% into it, so that one will definitely be in my March wrap up, and I read the majority of that in February. And was hoping to finish it out before the end of February, but was unable to. And I also, quick update on Caste, because this has been my like 1 chapter a day book. I'm very close to the end. I think I will be finishing this within the week, and so this has been my like, I've read 1 chapter a day from it for the whole month. And next up on that, I'll talk about in my TBR section, but this will definitely be in my March wrap up as well. But the majority of this I did read in February. So that's an update on those 2 that are going to be slightly continuing into March before we get into my February TBR. Okay, first up for my March TBR, before I go any further, we're going to do the TBR jar. So let me shake this up really quick, and then I'll pull from this so that I can get that one out of the way. I do need to update this. I haven't put I feel like the last 3 months of books in here, so I do need to get this updated, but I'm okay with it being not updated for now because I am trying to read some of the books that have been on my physical TBR for a little bit longer. That being said, let's get into this. I forgot to take out my 2 paper things because I cut all of these beforehand so that I can just add them quickly. So now let's check it up. Alrighty. I don't know how to hold this. Here we go. Okay, I've got one. Alright, I pulled A Forest of 1,000 Lanterns. This one has been on my physical TBR for years and years and years. I bought this a really long time ago from... I don't even know that the website that I bought this from is an active website anymore. I bought it from one of those websites that sells old library books. but I don't know if the one that I bought it for is even active anymore. But I got this in, I want to say 2019. So it's been on my TBR for quite a while. Let me find it in my massive book set, then I'll come back and read the synopsis. That was quite the excursion to get this out. But here we are, the Forest of 1,000 Lanterns. Let me read you the synopsis. 18-year-old Shifeng is beautiful. The stars say she is destined for greatness, that she is meant to be Empress of Fenglu, but only if she embraces the darkness within her. Growing up as a peasant in a forgotten village on the edge of the map, Shifeng longs to fulfill the destiny promised to her by her cruel aunt, the witch Guma, who has read the cards and seen glimmers of Shifeng's majestic future. But is the price of the throne too high? Because in order to achieve greatness, she must spurn the young man who loves her and exploit the callous magic that runs through her veins, sorcery fueled by eating the hearts of the recently killed. For the god who has sent her on this journey will not be satisfied until his power is absolute. Set in an East Asian-inspired fantasy world filled with both breathtaking pain and beauty, Julie C. Dow's reimagining of the Evil Queen legend from Snow White possesses all the hallmarks of masterful fantasy. Dazzling magic, heartbreaking romance, and a world that hangs in the balance. Fans of The Wrath in the Dawn, Stealing Snow, and The Red Queen will devour this stunning debut. So, pretty excited to read this, actually, because it's been on my TBR for a while, and I'm excited to get it off my physical TBR. The other book that I'm planning to read this month is The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi. And I just love Shannon Chakraborty. I read the Devabad trilogy in 2023. And I'm making my husband read it right now, so I really, really love it, and I've just heard such amazing things, and we're sort of getting brief announcements on the second book in this, so I think it's time to dive in. And then this also, the fantasy bingo challenge ends this month. I don't know if I'm going to be able to complete it because I have a few squares left, and not all the books that I need for those squares are on my TBR, but we'll see. But this I'm going to use for the alliteration box. So this is also doubling for that. Then let's read the synopsis for this one. Amina al-Sirafi should be content. After a storied and scandalous career as one of the Indian Ocean's most notorious pirates, she survived backstabbing rogues, vengeful merchant princes, several husbands, and one actual demon to retire peacefully with her family to a life of piety, motherhood, and absolutely nothing that hints of the supernatural. But when she's struck down by the obscenely wealthy mother of a former crewman, she's offered a job no bandit could refuse: retrieve her comrade's kidnapped daughter for a kingly sum. The chance to have one last adventure with her crew, do right by an old friend, and win a fortune that will secure her family's future forever. It seems like such an obvious choice that it must be God's will. Yet the deeper Amina dives, the more it becomes alarmingly clear there's more to this job and the girl's disappearance than she was led to believe. For there's always risks in wanting to become a legend, to seize one last chance at glory, to savor just a bit more power. And the price might be your very soul. So that's the other book that I'm planning to read in physical format. I am actually planning to tandem read this, or some people call it immersion reading now. I've always called it tandem reading, and I've been doing it for years, but tandem/immersion read, where I listen to audiobook while I read the physical book with my eyes, because I've heard that the audiobook for this is absolutely incredible. But I had already bought this before I knew that the audiobook was so incredible, so I really like to read it both ways. And then I also always annotate my physical books. So since I have the physical book, I would like to annotate it, and tandem/immersion reading will allow me to listen to the phenomenal audiobook and annotate as well. So that's the other book on my physical TBR for the month. And then I already talked about Caste, so gonna continue reading one chapter a day until I finish that. And then once I finish that, the next book I'm gonna be reading one chapter a day from is the Odyssey, translated by Emily Wilson. I don't think I need to read the synopsis for that, but I have actually been really wanting to read the translation by Emily Wilson. She is the first woman that has ever translated the Odyssey, and I have both the Odyssey and the Iliad up here. So I'm probably going to do those back to back. I'll read one chapter a day from the Odyssey, and then once I finish the Odyssey, I will move on to the Iliad. So that's my plans for my one chapter a day reading once I finish out with Caste. Then one other technically physical book that I have is my book for Traveling Book Club. I'm super excited to get to this. We are reading these through March. We kind of played with the timeline a little bit, so I will have all of March to read this and then send it off to the next person, and that is Nettle and Bone. I read the synopsis to this in my last video of my TBR January, February TBR thing. But yeah, this is like very fairy tale. I'm really excited. This will be my second T. Kingfisher book. The other book I've read is What Moves the Dead, and I didn't love that book, but I didn't love it because I didn't like the horror aspects super much, and this one is more in the realm of fantasy world, whereas that one was more in the realm of horror. But I think all of T. Kingfisher's books are pretty like intersectional horror fantasy, but I've heard really, really great things about this one specifically, so I'm really excited to dive in and super excited to be doing this with my traveling book club. All right, on to my non-physical reads. The first book that I'm planning to read in digital format is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and this is also for the Fantasy Bingo. This is for a book published in the 90s, I think is what the square says. I feel like this is a pretty popular one. Most people will probably know the synopsis to this, but I'm going to read the synopsis for you anyway. Young Fitz is the bastard son of the noble Prince Chivalry, raised in the shadow of the royal court by his father's gruff stableman. He is treated as an outcast by all the royalty except the devious King Shrewd, who has him secretly tutored in the arts of the assassin. For in Fitz's blood runs the magic skill, and the darker knowledge of a child raised with the stable hands and rejected by his family. As barbarous raiders ravage the coasts, Fitz is growing to manhood. Soon he will face his first dangerous, soul-shattering mission, and though some regard him as a threat to the throne, he may just be the key to the survival of the kingdom. So, pretty simple fantasy, I think, but a lot of people really, really love this, and it was recommended to us by a friend long before I really started, like, being a part of the book community, so very excited to get to that one. That's the first book on my digital TBR. The other book on my digital TBR is A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair. And this is the pick for the other book club that I'm in, the All Shades book club that is hosted by Sarah. So that is for that. Let me read the synopsis for that one. Kira is a killer. As the king's blade, she is the most talented spy in the kingdom and the king's favored assassin. When a mysterious figure called the Shadow starts making moves against the crown, Kira is forced to hunt the masked menace down. She crosses into the magical lands of the Fae, trying to discern if her enemy is mortal, elf, or halfling like her. But the Faeland is not what it seems, and neither is the Shadow. Kira is shocked by what she discovers and can't help but wonder who her enemy truly is. The king that destroyed her people, the prince that tortures them, or the shadow that threatens her place at court? As she searches for answers, Kira is haunted by a promise she made long ago, a promise not only to save herself, but an entire kingdom. So, that is A Broken Blade. I've heard such great things about this entire series, and the last book in the series just came out this year. So, super excited. We'll probably, if I really love this, dive into the whole series hopefully this year. So that's the other book on my digital TBR. And then for my audio TBR, I'm planning to read Here We Go Again by Alison Cochrun, and also Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews, I think is their last name, but let me double check. So let me read the synopsis for both of those. The Here We Go Again is on my 25 and 2025. I think that's the only one that's on my 25 and 2025 this month. Alright, the synopsis for Here We Go Again. A long time ago, Logan and Rosemary used to be friends. They spent their childhood summers running through the woods, rebelling against their conservative small town, and dreaming of escaping. But then, an incident the summer before high school turned them into bitter rivals. After graduation, they went 10 years without speaking. Now in their 30s, Logan and Rosemary find they aren't quite living the lives of adventure they imagined for themselves. Still in their small town and working as teachers at their alma mater, they're both stuck in old patterns. Uptight Rosemary chooses security and stability over all else, working constantly, and her most stable relationship is with her label maker. Chaotic and impulsive Logan has a long list of misguided ex-lovers and an apathetic shrug she uses to protect herself from anything real. and as hard as they try to avoid each other and their complicated past, they keep crashing into each other, including with their cars. But when their beloved former English teacher and lifelong mentor tells them that he only has a few months to live, they're forced together once and for all to fulfill his last wish, a cross-country road trip. Stuffed into the gayest van west of the Mississippi, the three embark on a life-changing summer trip from Washington State to the Grand Canyon, from the Gulf Coast to coastal Maine, that will chart a new future and perhaps lead them back to one another. So, very excited for that one. And like I said, that one is part of my 25 and 2025. And then Don't Let the Forest In, yes, by C.G. Drews. I did get their last name right. This has been on my TBR for so long. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say anything bad about this book. Everyone seems to really love it, and it seems right up my alley. It's like horror and somewhat fairy tale-esque, which is like perfectly up my alley. So, synopsis for that. Once upon a time, Andrew had cut out his heart and given it to this boy, and he was very sure Thomas had no idea that Andrew would do anything for him, protect him, lie for him, kill for him. High school senior Andrew finds refuge in the twisted fairy tales that he writes for the only person who can ground him in reality. Thomas, the boy who with perpetually ink-stained hands and hair like autumn leaves, and with his twin sister Dove inexplicably keeping him at a cold distance upon their return to Wakewood Academy, Andrew finds himself leaning on his friend even more. But something strange is going on with Thomas. His abusive parents have mysteriously vanished, and he arrives at school with blood on his sleeve. Thomas won't say a word about it and shuts down whenever Andrew tries to ask him questions. Stranger still, Thomas is haunted by something, and he seems to have lost interest in his artwork, whimsically macabre sketches of the monsters from Andrew's wicked stories. Desperate to figure out what's wrong with his friend, Andrew follows Thomas into the off-limits forest one night and catches him fighting a nightmarish monster. Thomas's drawings have come to life and are killing anyone close to him. To make sure no one else dies, the boys battle the monsters every night. But as their obsession with each other grows stronger, so do the monsters. And Andrew begins to fear that the only way to stop the creatures might be to destroy their creator. So, like I said, very fairy tale, very like horror, also queer, right up my alley, and I'm so excited to get into that one. And that is my full TBR for March. My TBR is a little time crunched this month because the Trans Rights Readathon is later this month. It starts on March 21st, so I'm hoping to have all of these books done before then, so slightly time crunched, like I said. Because I will have a separate TBR for the Trans Rights Readathon, and I will have a video coming out about that when the Trans Rights Readathon starts. I'm very excited for that. I really loved participating in it last year, and I'm super excited that they decided to extend it a few days this year, and I'm really excited to dive into those books as well, but I will save that for the video on the Trans Rights Readathon that I will put out later. But I will see you again soon. My next video will be my February journaling pages, stats, everything like that, and also my March journaling intro page. So I'll see you for that next time.